Look at this aerial photograph. A quiet California suburb. Streets, houses, trees, parked cars casting long afternoon shadows. Nothing unusual at all, except this photograph was taken in 1942, specifically by the Army Air Corps, to verify they had successfully hidden one of America's most important weapons factories from Japanese bombers. Underneath those fake streets, tens of thousands of workers. Underneath those fake lawns, P-38 Lightning fighters being built by the thousands. The Japanese never came. The factory disappeared anyway. But the question that photograph raises has never fully been answered. Did the enemy already know exactly where it was? The Lockheed Aircraft Corporation had been at its Burbank, California address since 1928. Not secret, not classified, not hidden. Its facility appeared on California aviation maps, in aviation trade publications, in commercial directories. For 13 years before anyone thought to camouflage it, the Lockheed plant in Burbank was simply a fact of California industrial life, producing aircraft, visible from the highway, audible from the surrounding streets, operating in the open air of the San Fernando Valley. Robert Gross had rebuilt the company from near bankruptcy after purchasing it for a reported $40,000 in 1932, and by the late 1930s, Lockheed was supplying Hudson bombers to Britain and building a reputation as one of America's most capable aircraft manufacturers. The facility's address was not a state secret. It was a business address. Then Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Overnight, the geography of American production became a list of vulnerabilities. Lockheed's Burbank plant was the primary production site for the P-38 Lightning, the twin-engine long-range fighter the Army Air Corps was counting on for Pacific operations. Lose that factory, and you lose a significant portion of American fighter output. The Army understood the exposure immediately. The problem was that stopping production was impossible. The plant had to keep running. It had to disappear while running. The solution that came back from Army planning was the most audacious industrial camouflage project America had ever attempted. Rather than move the factory or simply restrict access, they would build a complete fake neighborhood on top of it. Streets, houses, trees, lawns. The illusion, seen from a Japanese bomber at altitude, had to be convincing enough to make the plant invisible. Reportedly, approximately 2,000 workers were required just to install the structure, a figure cited in several accounts, though Army camouflage unit records would be needed to confirm it precisely. The framework alone required miles of industrial chicken wire stretched across rooftops and anchored to the buildings underneath. And here, the Army had an advantage almost no other military possessed. Lockheed's Burbank facility sat directly adjacent to Warner Brothers studio lots. The world's most experienced builders of convincing fake environments, art directors and set designers who spent careers making medieval castles look real on film, were, in several accounts, consulted on making the fake suburb convincing from 20,000 feet. The specific names of those professionals have not been widely documented. Army camouflage unit files would verify the collaboration. But the logic was unavoidable. Hollywood knew how to build things that looked real and were not. The Army needed exactly that skill. The materials were burlap, painted canvas, lightweight wood framing, and chicken wire. The fake house facades carried no foundations, no interiors, pure visual surface built to survive San Fernando Valley weather while appearing residential from altitude. The fake lawns spread across the rooftops were burlap dyed to match California's dry season color. And here is where the operation reveals its own strange internal logic. Those fake lawns reportedly required active sprinkler systems. Dead, dried-out fake grass would signal camouflage to any trained eye at altitude. Someone had a full-time job maintaining the front lawns of a fake California neighborhood sitting on top of a working P-38 factory. Approximately 26 acres of this structure covered the main plant and associated areas, cited across several secondary sources, though primary Army records would sharpen the exact figure. The fear driving all of this was real. On the night of February 24th into the 25th, 1942, weeks after camouflage construction had begun, anti-aircraft batteries across Los Angeles opened fire on the sky. Army gunners expended approximately 1,400 rounds of anti-aircraft ammunition. The target was most likely a weather balloon or radar interference caught in the dark. 3 to 5 civilians died in the confusion, heart attacks, car accidents, in the sudden blackout. The Battle of Los Angeles was not a combat victory. It was a city firing 1,400 artillery shells at darkness because it genuinely believed Japanese bombers were overhead. Burbank heard those guns. Burbank's factory workers heard those guns. The fake neighborhood being built over their heads suddenly did not feel like theater. The factory wasn't a secret. It never had been. By spring of 1942, the fake neighborhood was complete, and the P-38 Lightning production line underneath it was running at full stretch. Workers arrived before sunrise, entering through access points built into the base of the fake structures, gates designed to maintain the residential illusion at street level, while absorbing a workforce that would eventually push into the tens of thousands. The exact peak employment figure at Lockheed Burbank varies dramatically depending on the source, ranging from roughly 17,000 to figures well above 90,000 when subsidiary and contractor workforces are included. Whatever the precise count, the physical evidence tells the story. Parking lots packed with cars stretching toward the Warner Brothers lot fence line, shift change traffic flooding Burbank streets before and after every dawn, every noon, every midnight. A quiet California suburb does not generate that kind of traffic. Nothing about Lockheed's Burbank operation was quiet. A significant portion of that workforce was women. Lockheed's wartime production lines drew heavily on female riveters, welders, assemblers, and inspectors, women who had not been building aircraft before 1941 and who were now building some of the most capable fighters in the Pacific Theater, working under a ceiling of chicken wire and burlap, while sprinklers maintained the fake lawn above them. Inside the plant, the scale was industrial and unrelenting. P-38 fuselage sections moving through assembly jigs, engine installations, wing mating operations, inspection stations, paint shops. The noise was constant. Anyone standing on Burbank's real streets outside the plant could hear exactly what was happening beneath the fake residential landscape. The camouflage was built to deceive a pilot at 25,000 feet. It was not built to deceive a neighbor. When completed P-38 aircraft rolled out for flight testing, they used the very runway the fake neighborhood had been built to disguise, an active test airfield camouflaged to appear from altitude as open land or residential streets. A P-38 Lightning taking off from a runway designed to look like a road through a quiet neighborhood is an image that belongs in a photograph that almost no one has seen. Those Lightnings went to the Pacific, and in April 1943, a specific mission made the factory's output impossible to ignore. Operation Vengeance, the intercept of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's aircraft over Bougainville on April 18, 1943, was flown entirely by P-38 aircraft. The architect of Pearl Harbor was shot down by fighters built under a fake front lawn in Burbank, California. The camouflage was protecting the weapon that would eventually make the camouflage unnecessary. Across the country in Seattle, Boeing was doing the same thing. Boeing's massive Plant 2, producing B-17 components, had been covered with a similar fake residential landscape. Streets, houses, the whole domestic illusion stretched across industrial rooftops. Some local accounts in Seattle claim the fake streets were named after plant employees, though this detail needs verification against Boeing's historical records. Two of America's most important aircraft factories had simultaneously chosen to disappear under identical fictions in two different American cities, and both fictions required daily maintenance crews to sustain. Meanwhile, something else was being built at Burbank. In 1943, while the fake suburb overhead was still being watered and patched, a small team began operating from a rented circus tent erected adjacent to the main production floor. Kelly Johnson, Lockheed's chief engineer, sharp-tempered, Technically brilliant, legendarily impatient with organizational interference, was the driving force. His team had been given a specific and extraordinary task: design and build America's first operational jet fighter. The XP-80 Shooting Star program operated in conditions that were, by almost any standard, absurd. A handful of engineers working in a circus tent next to a factory disguised as a suburb, producing classified designs that most of Lockheed's own workforce was not cleared to know about. Johnson's 14 rules for what would become the Skunk Works were partly a reaction to working in those conditions. Speed, secrecy, small teams, direct access, minimal bureaucracy. The physical circumstances were primitive, the results were not. The diners and bars along Hollywood Way and the surrounding Burbank streets filled on every shift change. Local businesses had built themselves around Lockheed's payroll, a pattern as old as military industry, where one contract becomes the economic logic of an entire surrounding neighborhood. Workers ate at the same counters, sat in the same booths, took the same routes home. Inside the plant, security protocols layered on top of the physical camouflage. Strict badge checks, no photography, no discussion of production rates, monitored communications. The fake neighborhood was one form of protection. The rules were another. By late 1944, the P-38 production line was among the most productive in the country. The war was being won, in part, by aircraft built under burlap grass in the San Fernando Valley. That solved one problem. What came next was something no amount of chicken wire could hide. August 1945, Japan surrendered. The burlap started coming down. Workers who had spent years maintaining fake lawns and patching fake house facades began dismantling the structure in reverse, rolling back chicken wire, pulling down painted canvas, removing the lightweight wood framing that had made a weapons factory look like a residential street from the air. The fake neighborhood that had taken an army of workers to build came apart in weeks. The plant appeared from the air for the first time since 1942. Whether anyone in Japan was still watching is a different question entirely. Whether anyone in Japan had ever been fooled is the question this story has been carrying since that first aerial photograph. The women who had built P-38 fighters under the burlap ceiling did not get to see much of what came next. With returning male veterans flooding the labor market, Lockheed, like most American defense manufacturers, dismissed its female production workforce in large numbers through late 1945 and into 1946. The women who had riveted and welded and inspected fighters under a fake California suburb, who had built the planes that flew Operation Vengeance, were handed dismissal notices and sent home. The plant that had needed them desperately for 4 years found them inconvenient the moment the contracts changed shape. Production contracts did change shape, but Lockheed's Burbank campus did not go quiet. The Cold War arrived almost immediately, and it brought a different kind of mission, one that did not require chicken wire because it had something more durable than camouflage. It had classification. Kelly Johnson's circus tent operation had already evolved by the time the fake suburb came down. The Skunk Works, officially advanced development programs, moved into proper facilities on the Burbank campus and began producing aircraft whose names would take decades to become public. The U-2 reconnaissance aircraft, designed to fly higher than any Soviet interceptor could reach, was developed at Burbank. Early conceptual and design work connected to what would become the SR-71 Blackbird passed through the same address. The location had appeared on California aviation maps since 1928. The work happening inside it was now among the most classified in the American government. The secrecy changed form, but the Burbank address stayed the same. Through the 1950s and 1960s and into the 1970s, the campus was the economic anchor of Burbank, a city of roughly 90,000 people by the post-war decades whose commercial streets, diners, and housing tracts were quietly calibrated to Lockheed's payroll cycles. Company recreation associations, community sponsorships, Families across multiple generations working at the same plant their parents had entered through gates built into a fake neighborhood. The dependency was not hidden. It was just not discussed. Then the Cold War ended, and a corporate merger did what Japanese bombers never had. In 1995, Lockheed merged with Martin Marietta to form Lockheed Martin. The logic was consolidation, combining overlapping facilities, reducing redundancy, squeezing efficiency from a defense industry that the post-Cold War budget environment was suddenly pressuring hard. Burbank's manufacturing operations were identified as redundant. The Skunk Works, the institutional heir to everything Kelly Johnson had built in that circus tent, was relocated to Palmdale, California, where Lockheed Martin's flight test operations were based. The engineers and designers who had worked in one of American aviation's most consequential facilities packed their materials and drove north on the 14 freeway. The Burbank campus lost the thing that had made it irreplaceable. The manufacturing buildings came down progressively through the 1990s and into the 2000s. The large production hangars where P-38 fuselages had moved through assembly jigs. The warehouses, the support structures, the buildings that the fake neighborhood had been protecting. They were demolished without the ceremony that might have accompanied a military base closure, because this was a corporate decision, a balance sheet conclusion, not a BRAC vote. The plant that had survived Japanese attack, Cold War secrecy, and more than 6 decades of continuous production was dismantled because a merger spreadsheet said it should be. What remained was the runway. The test flight runway, the one that had been camouflaged to appear as open land or suburban streets from altitude, the one from which completed P-38 Lightnings had rolled into the California sky, the one from which the XP-80 had first demonstrated that American jet aviation was real, became the operating runway of Hollywood Burbank Airport. Commercial carriers now use it for scheduled service. Southwest Airlines, Alaska Airlines, morning departures, afternoon arrivals, the ordinary rhythm of regional air travel. No marker on the terminal tells passengers what the ground beneath them cost to build, or what it once produced, or what was buried under fake grass overhead while the production lines ran. No section of the original chicken wire framework is preserved anywhere. No piece of burlap, no fake house facade, no fake tree from the most elaborate wartime industrial deception in American history is on public display. The Burbank Historical Society holds photographs. The Smithsonian's archives hold production records. But the physical object that the whole story was built around, the fake neighborhood itself, exists now only as an image, which is, in a way, the most complete camouflage of all. Look at the aerial photograph again. The same framing. A quiet California landscape, an airport, a runway, aircraft on the tarmac. The runway is the only thing that connects 1942 to this morning. Everything the camouflage was protecting is gone. The camouflage is gone. The runway survived. It still carries aircraft. They no longer carry guns.